Welcome everyone to this webinar today on mainstreaming biodiversity safeguards through NBSAPs. I would like to start the webinar by inviting Mary Melnyk, the Environmental Security and Resilience Division Chief on the Asia Bureau at USAID, to provide us with some opening remarks. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Tremi, and greetings to all of you. And I would like to sincerely thank our co-hosts, the World Wildlife Fund and the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. And I'd like to recognize the outstanding work they're doing under the Align project. It is an honor to be joining you today. Many of you who are champions of not only big cats, but also of the conservation of all nature. Because of your championship, the Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted at the last Biodiversity Conference of the Parties. Also, at this COP15, the Align project was launched. Align stands for Asia's Linear Infrastructure Safeguarding Nature. The goal of the Align project is to enhance the development and implementation of effective, high-quality linear infrastructure safeguards that protect people and nature from harm. It is notable that Target 14 of the Global Biodiversity Framework is to integrate biodiversity in decision-making at every level. The target states that we are to ensure the full integration of biodiversity and its multiple values into policies, regulations, planning, and development processes, in particular, those with significant impacts on biodiversity. Such impacts are clearly occurring by the increase of roads, rails, and transmission lines. To demonstrate the importance of safeguards and wildlife-friendly infrastructure, Dr. Neil Carter estimated that nearly 24,000 kilometers of new roads will be built in tiger conservation landscapes by 2050. That is like building 6 new interstate highways from Boston to Seattle. Align was conceived to prevent these impacts and to mainstream the options available to avoid and mitigate harm to biodiversity. Its first objective focuses on policies and practices. It is strengthening the policy frameworks of government, private and finance sectors, and civil society stakeholders while working towards effective application of natural resource safeguards for linear infrastructure that aligns with international best practices. The second objective emphasizes partnerships and engagements. It is enhancing partnerships to promote and support investment in and implementation of safeguards for linear infrastructure that lead to biodiversity conservation and ecosystem resilience in the face of climate change. Align's third objective increases the capacity of stakeholders to contribute to the better management of natural resources by implementing high-quality natural resource safeguards for linear infrastructure and promoting and applying sustainable infrastructure development options. Let me also reflect on big cats and why big cats. Within the fabric of life known as biodiversity, the tiger is truly the golden thread. It is an apex predator. Conserving it conserves the myriad of species that roam or live within its habitat. The conservation of big cats advances broader efforts to conserve ecosystems upon which millions of people depend for their lives and livelihoods, and which underpin our societies and economies. Focusing on big cats, environmental safeguards like wildlife-friendly infrastructure, and their incorporation into national biodiversity strategies and action plans can provide multiple benefits for us. For example, we conserve an iconic species. We conserve an ecosystem under which humans and all manner of species depend. We conserve watersheds, supplying life-giving water. And the resulting healthy ecosystems provide resilience to climate change. Yet we know that so much more needs to be done. Tigers, wildlife, and nature itself are under intense pressure from not only infrastructure, but poaching and other forms of rapid urban development and climate change. Today's webinar is an opportunity to engage and incorporate wildlife-friendly infrastructure within national biodiversity strategies and action plans as the world prepares for COP16. It is an opportunity to recognize, avoid, and mitigate the significant pressures arising from the expansion of roads, rails, and transmission lines into, for the purpose of our webinar and Align project, Asia's last great areas of nature. We also are very pleased to have presenters who will be giving global experiences. Align's work builds on the earlier Linear Infrastructure Safeguard Assessment for Asia called LISA, also funded by USAID as Align is. And LISA was implemented by the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. And the reason I mention this is because LISA included numerous training modules which we can all use to increase the capacity to implement wildlife-friendly infrastructure. These training modules can be found on Align's website. Together, including all of us here today, we can build the necessary momentum for safeguarding big cats in all of nature, and while providing high-quality infrastructure. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today, and I'm looking forward to your partnership and future success in conserving biodiversity through national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your words of introduction. And yes, once again, welcome to this webinar and welcome to this series. I would just like to say that we've had 3 other webinars on this topic. If you haven't had a chance to look at them, we will put a link in the chat so that you can go back and take a look on YouTube. And we will also put a link in the chat to the Align project that Mary has described. It's an amazing project and has so much to offer. There's actually another webinar coming up on Monday, also on the Align project, that we will share information about at the end of the talk today. So thank you, Mary. Now I would like to pass the microphone to my colleague Neshmiya Khan. Neshmiya is a manager of policy and safeguards at WWF-Pakistan, and she's going to weave together these complex concepts of big cats, linear infrastructure, and international conventions. Thank you very much, Neshmiya.
Thank you, Tremi. Let me just share my screen quickly. Perfect. I first want to thank everyone for coming, for attending this webinar. We're extremely excited to share a lot of the work that is being done in connection with sort of big cats linear infrastructure. But then the question comes about, what is the connection between big cats and linear infrastructure, and why is it relevant for one's global biodiversity framework goals and the targets, and with the specific NBSAPs as well? So big cats are an extremely important indicator species in terms of determining ecosystem health, because more big cats, increased populations is a good sign of habitat health. Not just that, but protecting big cat species also means protected vast ecosystems thanks to their enormous biodiverse range. Big cats roam across 74% of the globe, overlapping with 75% key biodiversity areas. So a lot of the landscapes where they roam are important in determining, along with the existing wildlife that becomes their prey species. It determines the health of the same, and also whether the habitat is one that requires protection or is working fine. So to echo what my previous speaker said, this aligns very closely with the target 14 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and it's interesting because when one thinks about linear infrastructure, one doesn't really make the connection. However, a lot of new land, a lot of new roads and construction infrastructure is being developed in areas which were once unreachable, which were once inaccessible, and these are homes to various big cat species. So keeping this in mind, one also thinks about how does one ensure that without sort of compromising the needs of the communities and the needs of individuals and various states in their need to ensure the development of critical and key infrastructure, but then also ensuring the protection of key species. So Target 14 speaks to this. Target 14 of the Global Biodiversity Framework is defined as enabling condition one needs to consider when looking at infrastructure development and how it needs to be regulated. So it's quite clear in its words as well, is that it requires the integration of biodiversity considerations and its multiple values into policies, regulations, planning, and development processes. So why linear infrastructure? So with linear infrastructure emerging as a new threat to the habitats of big cat species, revised NBSAPs in light of the target 14, which was discussed in the previous slide, it needs to work on improving planning procedures with the integration of biodiversity consideration. So we need to have improved EI procedures. We need to have improved SEA procedures. We need to ensure that even before the planning and development of any infrastructure work that's happening, we are able to assess and identify specific ecosystems and habitats that could be impacted because of the construction of such linear infrastructure development. So this could mean mitigation, the measures such as the identification and zoning of ecological corridors, which are home to several key species, which can be done pre-construction, or the construction of wildlife crossings post-construction as well. So it's very important that as part of the work we do, we identify the impacts of linear infrastructure on big cat habitats and to ensure the protection and the conservation of such areas, because once you develop a road you end up fragmenting and end up causing a type of detrimental impact in that specific area. So the best way to do so is to ensure the mainstreaming of biodiversity considerations in the way we design, in the way we plan, and in the way we eventually construct these infrastructure, especially roads and railways, which act as the barriers and act as to fragment these areas as well. So this is just a few things. We have some excellent examples given by the next speakers, and we would encourage everyone that when one is, because the NBSAPs are currently being revised, and we would hope that the target and the push towards ensuring improved planning procedures is sort of made part of revised NBSAPs as well. So that's it from my end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neshmiya. They seem like very distinct topics, but in fact, they have so much to do with each other. So I really appreciate your that introduction. And as we all know, the Convention on Biological Diversity COP is starting in just over a month. So countries are preparing their NBSAPs and readying for that COP. So I would like to now pass the microphone to Laetitia Navarro. She is going to be talking about the NBSAPs across Asia and their inclusion of safeguards for linear infrastructure. Dr. Laetitia Navarro is a postdoctoral fellow at the Doñana Biological Station, which is part of the Spanish Research Council. Thank you so much for being with us today, Laetitia, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Tremi. Let me just share my screen. All right. Can you confirm that you can see it? Perfect.
That's
so
terrific.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to be talking to you about a project that we started a couple of months ago on the prominence of linear infrastructure in NBSAPs and national reports. And I will present you some very preliminary results specifically on Asia. But I wanted to point out that the work that we're doing for this project is on linear infrastructure generally, so energy and transport. But for this presentation, I will be focusing on transport. And speaking of which, I don't think that I will surprise anybody attending this webinar if I tell you that roads and transport infrastructure has important and significant impact, both direct and indirect, on biodiversity, but also on society. What makes it a key issue of great interest is that we're expecting that in the next decade, we could see an increase of up to 22% of the road network globally, and that would particularly happen in South America, in Africa, but also in South and East Asia. And so in this context, we wanted to know to which extent transport infrastructure is considered within biodiversity conservation policy. But before I start answering this, I would like to offer you to pause for just 1 minute and to give you a crash course on NBSAPs and national reports, because I think this is something you're going to hear a lot about in the different talks. So this all starts with the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is the UN body that for over 30 years now has been guiding the global conservation of biodiversity. And the way it does that, among other things, is that it proposes a decadal strategic plan for the conservation of biodiversity. Notably, back in 2010 in Japan, the parties of the CBDs approved the UN Strategic Plan for Biodiversity for 2020, which was composed of 5 goals and 20 targets that you may know as the Aichi biodiversity targets. And what that means is that once these global frameworks are approved by the parties of the CBDs, the parties are invited to translate and implement those at the national level. And they do that by writing or reviewing their national biodiversity strategy and action plan, the famous NBSAPs, which are themselves composed of sets of national goals and national targets. And after they submit this back to the CBD, then the countries are invited to report on their achievement of the national goals and targets every 5 years or so. So those are the national reports. And what's important to know, and you already heard about that, is that a couple of years ago, the parties of the CBD approved a new global framework, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, that is composed of a different set of goals and targets, which means that at the moment, parties of the CBDs are in the process of reviewing their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So that was it for the crash course. Now back to our project. So what we are doing is that we are reviewing NBSAPs that have been submitted to the CBD between the COP10 and the COP15. That is the NBSAPs that respond to the Aichi biodiversity targets. And we're also reviewing the corresponding national reports. So this is still work in progress, but we reviewed so far 181 NBSAPs and 43 national reports. We're using keywords for this review and reviewed documents in English and are in the process of reviewing as well documents in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and in Italian. And we start by a simple question. Does the document mention the transport infrastructure? And if it does it mention the impact of the transport infrastructure? And or does it mention approaches to mitigate this impact? And here we're using the mitigation hierarchies. So we're looking at avoidance, minimizing, restoring, and offsetting those impacts. I left on the top right corner some additional questions that we're asking when we're reviewing those documents, but I will not have time to go into details over this, so this is more for your information. I'll start very briefly by giving you some global numbers. So this is the map representing the countries for which we have reviewed a policy document, so either NBSAP or national report. So far we have reviewed documents for 193 countries, mostly NBSAPs. And this is still, as I mentioned, work in progress. So I want you to keep in mind that some patterns may change when more documents are reviewed, but at this point we would be reviewing mostly reports rather than strategies. So 193 countries for which we could review documents. And the first results that we have is that just a little over half of those countries, 52% of the countries, do mention the transport infrastructure in their policy documents. And less than 40% of those countries actually discuss specifically the impact of transport infrastructure. And if we look at the mention of the mitigation of the impact, we get a much lower percentage. Less than 20% of the countries for which we could review documents actually discuss the mitigation of the impact of roads, for instance. Now zooming into Asia. So we were able to review documents for 47 countries, which you can see on this map is that a little less than half of those countries specifically discuss the type of impact that cause transport infrastructure. And particularly what is most consistently discussed in those documents is habitat loss, fragmentation, and the behavioral response that species may have to roads, for instance. So those are the countries identified with a black dot on this map. What was slightly surprising, at least to me, is that very few countries in comparison discuss direct mortality. So only 4 countries discuss the direct mortality as an impact in their policy documents. And similarly, chemical pollution is discussed in only 5 countries. Moving on to the mitigation, so we found 11 countries that discuss mitigation measures for transport infrastructure in their policy documents. 3 countries, mostly in the western part of the continent, discuss avoiding the impact with spatial planning. And minimizing is clearly what is more consistently discussed, particularly, and these are the countries that are identified with the yellow dots here, the management of peripheral areas. So 7 countries discussed that. Again, a bit surprising to me was the fact that fencing and crossing structure were relatively less prominent in those documents. No country at all in Asia mentioned restoration, but to be fair, this is in line with the global trend. So far, I believe we only found 1 country that mentioned a restoration, for instance, decommissioning of roads, and that was Malta, if I'm not mistaken. And only 1 country mentioned offsetting. Again, this is in line with the global trend as well. So where do we go from there? So as I mentioned, we're still in the process of reviewing documents. And once we will be done with that, we want to explain the prominence of transport and energy infrastructure in those policy documents. And then, for instance, cross it with different indicators. We can think of the Human Development Index. We can think of GDP, for instance. But of course, what would be key is to cross this with the actual density of the infrastructure network within the countries and the relative access that people have to this infrastructure. I think it would also be really interesting to investigate the diversity of mitigation measure and the spatial distribution. And as you've already heard, and you're going to hear about in the next presentation, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was approved a couple of years ago. So countries are now in the process of reviewing their NBSAPs. So we also want to review the NBSAPs that have already been proposed. But we also hope that with our analysis, we could provide some kind of recommendations for the countries that would still be in the process of reviewing their NBSAPs. And I also wanted to highlight, you might already be aware of this, but a couple of weeks ago, IPBES, the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, launched a call for experts for the expert assessment on spatial planning and ecological connectivity that they're going to conduct between 2025 and 2027. So I think that this type of analysis and the kind of discussion that we're having today is really timely, and that this issue is indeed becoming more prominent. So with that, I would like to thank all my collaborators, and particularly a shout out to Amy Seeger that spearheaded the review of all those policy documents during your internship. And I'll be really happy to take your questions and comments when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laetitia. It's terrific to have that overview. And I'm excited that we have 2 speakers from Asian countries that can get us more into depth on the process and the thinking and what's happening in real time in the updating of the NBSAPs. So that's terrific. And please, once again, put your questions, click on the Q&A tab to add your questions for Laetitia. We'll be able to look at those in real time. And then at the end, we will also have space for questions. So thank you so much. Now I would like to go to Mrs. Tserendorj Uranchimeg. She is the Director General of Natural Resources Policies Implementation Department at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Mongolia. Mrs. Uranchimeg, if you could go ahead and put your camera and share, and we will go ahead and share our screen, and just let us know when you'd like us to advance slides. Let me just make sure we can hear you. Oh, yes, we can. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Can you share my presentation, please? Okay.
Yes, now we can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon in Mongolia now. I had, and starting in the one presentation from Mongolia is implementing monitoring infrastructure project about like has experience. The total length of the linear infrastructure 45,987 kilometers, which is the 16,325 kilometers of the international and national highways, 3,077 kilometers of railways, 25,095, 9,300 kilometers of the electric power networking, extending about roads by nearly 3,000 kilometers and planning new railways by 4,339 kilometers, increasing the pressure and the nomadic migratory species in the jeopardize the habitat connectivity, wildlife habitat and the linear infrastructure in the Mongolia. They are left between a planet, linear and the linear infrastructure project, such as the roads, railways, and the peoples. And the habits are rare animals like aged wild ass, Mongolian gazelle, black-tailed gazelle, argali, and snow leopard poses a significant conservation and challenge. Major linear infrastructure project can be future fragment the habitat, disrupt migration routes, and increase human-wildlife conflict. The wildlife conservation policy and implementation in Mongolia. The Mongolians long-term, can you change my, yeah, another one. Mongolian long-term development policy document vision in 2050 specific the following specific activities. One goal is the conduct nationwide study in wildlife resource and distribution in the stage to identify and monitoring change in the resource and create conditions for sustainable management. Second goal is the update the red list of fauna and flora species and identify and implement the ways to protect and pressure threatened wildlife species. The state policy on railroad transportation regards in the 3.1, 3. The population settlement urban areas, future development prospect in the urban planning, and the infrastructure systems such as the road, energy, and telecom communication facility will have common environmental conservation principle. While promoting and co-executing infrastructure facilities, cities and settlements along the infrastructure facilities, and small and medium enterprise development, the internal railroad network will ensure better wildlife migration and movement and prevent from desertification on the air and water and soil pollution. Okay, next slide, please. Wildlife conservation source and monitoring. Another one, please. Monitoring. Wildlife conservation resource and monitoring. The Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Mongolia are working closely with the international organizations such as the WWF in Mongolia and WCS Mongolia to conduct study and monitoring on the impact of linear infrastructure on wildlife. This collaboration plays key role in the protection of biodiversity and the environment. The key activities, next slide please. Key activities under the collaboration including, one is the impact study. Search is being conducted to access how linear infrastructure projects such as roads, railways, and people affect the habits and the migration patterns of wildlife. GPS tracking and other advanced technology are used to study an impact on species habits. The second one, monitoring and data collection. The monitoring system are being developed to track in the population and movement of wildlife, analyzing behavioral changes in the habitat conditions. For example, The habits of species such as the snow leopard, Argali sheep, and Mongolian gazelle are continuously monitored to measure the effectiveness of the infrastructure project. Third one is mitigation measures. Various mitigation strategies such as the construction of wildlife corridors or passes on the crossing are being explored by reduce the impact of liner infrastructure. These measures aim to ensure that the animals can continue to migration and move through their natural habits without the obstruction. Fourth one is community involvement. Local community and conservation are actively involved in monitoring and conservation activities with training provided to ensure the participation. This helps to create long-term solutions that balance conservation with sustainable development. These search and monitoring efforts are critical in protecting Mongolians' wildlife, ensuring the sustainable use of natural resources, and allowing a line in infrastructure development to proceed in environmentally friendly manner. Measure of the wild-friendly infrastructure. The National Coordination Platform established by the joint the two ministries, namely Ministry of Environment and Tourism and Ministry of Road and Transport Development of Mongolia, consisting of the 30 members from 22 institutions, including a government agency, international and national NGO, private sectors, this including a mining companies, liner infrastructure developers, and the operators. To especially coordination key partners and safeguarding the wildlife-friendly liner infrastructure in Mongolia. This coordination platform can be service main tools to bring all parties in the same page and they engage all of the obstacles from plan to work together, exchange information and experience in the extremely adopted the national resource safeguards at the national level. Mongolia became the first country in Central Asia that had mandatory standard for wildlife crossing for highways and the railroad in the steppe and Gobi desert areas in 2015. This initiative was the future defined in the 2018 mandatory standard for wildlife crossing and highways and railroads in the mountains and forest areas was developed with the support of WWF in Mongolia and the stakeholders. These two standards enable Mongolia to have wildlife their road network, which is expected to expand to meet our increasing demands to infrastructure from mining industry. In the future, it is necessary to ensure intersectoral coordination for application of standards in compliance monitoring. In 2024, with the support of WWF Mongolia, the wildlife-friendly barrier fences for railways and highways generally requires MNS 7022 in 2004. Fence standard was approved. Okay, now is in Mongolia, in NBSAP of Mongolia, talking about this. Mongolia has developed a second national program on biodiversity that the government of Mongolia coordinate and carry out the biodiversity conservation and sustainable management throughout the country during 2015 to 2025. By 2018, planning intersectoral coordination on the development of infrastructure for biodiversity, especially migratory species, is the strengthening. Coordination platform of wildlife-friendly liner infrastructure development was established in 2022. By 2022, international coordination with other countries of law pre-migrate routes in the transboundary areas in the endangered and threatened animals, especially improved. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Uranchimeg. That was a terrific presentation. I feel so privileged to work with colleagues from WWF Mongolia that I know that you're also working with, and these different standards are just so impressive to learn about the fencing standard, and then that such early adoption of a wildlife-friendly infrastructure standard. So congratulations to you and your government colleagues for
Okay.
all that you're doing.
Thank you, Trima.
Thank you. If you have questions for Mrs. Uranchimeg, please include them in the Q&A tab. And now for our next speaker, we're going to be going to another WWF colleague of mine, Ekraj Sigdel. He is the head of policy at WWF-Nepal. And thank you so much for being with us today, Ekraj. We're seeing your presenter screen, so I think we need to switch your screen there.
Is it not visible? Sorry.
If you go to the top of your screen, I believe you should be able to, under display settings there at the top. And switch.
Just a minute.
At the top of the screen, it says display settings, and you can switch between, there we go. Swap presenter view and slideshow. There we go. Terrific. Thank you so much, Ekraj, for being
So
here
much.
today.
Yeah.
Such a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Ekraj Sigdel. I work in WWF Nepal as a head of policy. Today, thank you for the opportunity for sharing our experiences on engaging with the NBSAP process in Nepal. Today, I'm just going to talk about the mainstreaming biodiversity safeguards through National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan in Nepal. I'll be sharing two parts. The first part will be the content and key elements regarding to the infrastructure in the NBSAP. And the second part is how the WWF is contributing towards strengthening that NBSAP from the biodiversity safeguard perspective. So regarding to the NBSAP in Nepal, you see, this is being developed under the leadership of the government of Nepal. The progress of the report has already been submitted, not the NBSAP itself, but mainly the monitoring metrics as a progress was submitted to the CBD by the government already. This is planned to be completed by February of 2025. This is being guided mainly the project will be developed, the NBSAP will be developed following whole of society approach, participatory and consultative process. Mainly, they will seek the participation of poor people, women, indigenous communities. So in this regard, they have already initiated some consultative process in the country. The NBSAP is being supported technically through a dedicated project from the UNDP. Though we are also becoming a part of the NBSAP preparation process. Mainly the WWF is contributing from the science. You see, the major 5 subjects, including safeguarding natural resources, human-wildlife conflict, minimization, IPLC perspective, and this freshwater and ocean. And sorry. So until now, the very preliminary draft has already been developed. It has the vision of prosperous Nepal, happy Nepali. This is the vision of the government as such. So this document will contribute to this vision. The goal of the NBSAP is restore resilience and green economy promotion. There are 4 results area and 36 action targets mentioned in the NBSAP, which is aligned with the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, where there is 23 action targets. but in our case, it is 36 action targets. One of the key challenges for biodiversity conservation is considered as this infrastructure is considered as the key challenges for achieving the biodiversity success, conservation success in Nepal. You see, Nepal, we are proud to say that we have already very promising results in terms of conserving biodiversity resources. We have allocated almost 24% of the land for protected areas. Again, you see, there is this needs to be balanced with the development. The priority of the government is again to construct the road. All the local governments, province governments and federal governments, they are putting their priority towards developing paved roads, earthen roads, and these pitch roads. So with this because of these two success, one is development success, one is conservation success, we have to balance. For this issue, there are issues. We are seeing many incidents of road killed by vehicles. So almost 25% of the wild animals are being killed by vehicles. So in terms of policy, if we see the policy of the government, before 1990, there was no provision of environmental consideration in infrastructure development. Between 1992 to 2010, there is a development of this studying IEIA, and to facilitate that process, the policy and plans are being developed. It's in 2014 to 22, there was a smart green infrastructure in NBSAP that was entered in the development process, and finally, since 2020 onwards, this wildlife-friendly infrastructure mainly in the 16th five-year plan, it includes this wildlife-friendly infrastructure to promote. Similarly, the draft NBSAP that is being developed also include the biodiversity-friendly infrastructure. In terms of WWF's stake on how we are engaged in the wildlife-friendly infrastructure, if you see the timeline, we have initiated our work since 2014 to promote the wildlife-friendly infrastructure. And during the interval of this 2014 to 2022, when the wildlife-friendly infrastructure got endorsed by the government, we had supported the government in capacity development activities and this partnership in development activities and many knowledge development activities. So with this, we have been the government has been able to produce the wildlife-friendly infrastructure guidelines in 2022. These days, we are supporting the government to roll out these guidelines with the support of this Align project that we have already talked here. So now I want to go towards the NBSAP process, how we are supporting. You see, from the very beginning of the process, we empowered, I will say empowered to the indigenous peoples and local communities network to engage with the NBSAP process itself. For this, the network of Oman indigenous communities as well as the NGO, IPLC NGOs, we supported them to organize various workshops, meetings, and they produced a position paper, including biodiversity, including their voice, how they want to see the NBSAP itself from their perspectives. So the position paper has already been submitted. In addition, these IPLC groups are being represented in program steering committee, as well as there is a separate thematic committee. So before there was no representation of IPLC, but now during this time, they are engaged from the very beginning of the process. In addition, we have adopted three-pronged strategy to be engaged with the NBSAP as well. For this, we have supported the stakeholders in policy and practice, mainly in the policy process. We are supporting to develop study reports, finding policy gaps, and developing some policy documents, policy briefs. And also we have this, the next strategy is partnership strategy, where we have this partnership platform at various levels. Some are formal and some are informal. We are engaged with them from the very beginning of the process, so that they are advocating the need of this mainstreaming biodiversity safeguards. And also that we are supporting the government as well as the private sectors towards strengthening their capacity, so that they will be able to engage in the NBSAP process as such, to mainstream biodiversity safeguards into the NBSAP process. So with these efforts, you see, we WWF we are working at the interface of the government and the private sectors and the civil society organizations. So with this effort, there are not only our efforts, but other efforts are there. Now, you see, under the Global Biodiversity Target 3, which is in line with this Global Biodiversity Framework Target 3, that is conserve 30% of land, water, and seas effectively. We have this Nepalese Target 3 that says that by 2030, ensure and enable ecologically representative, inclusive, equitably governed, and effectively managed biodiversity important areas. For this, we have indicators like integration of green, resilient, and inclusive infrastructure development approach in protected areas. For your kind information, this is not the final indicator. This is the provisional indicators. So there is a room to strengthen these indicators as well. The next GBF Target 4 that talks about the halt species extinction, protect genetic diversity, and manage human wildlife conflicts. In line with this, the Nepalese target is the Earth is Nepalese target that says by 2026 integrate biodiversity consideration into infrastructure development, linear infrastructure, especially in biological corridors, biological hotspots. For these indicators, there are environment consideration into infrastructure development. This will be one indicator. The next will be death of wildlife from linear infrastructure, wildlife-friendly infrastructure constructed, investment in wildlife-friendly infrastructures, and the final is the capacity building of stakeholders on biodiversity-friendly infrastructure. With this, I conclude my presentations. I am happy to respond to your questions. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ekraj. It's so wonderful to hear your presentation, and also such an honor to work with you. I would like to invite all of these speakers to turn on their cameras, and we can receive some questions. We have several questions here for our speakers. So let me start with Laetitia. I wonder if you can talk to me about why, or tell us about why you think there's a difference between the number of countries that mention transport infrastructure and those that actually discuss its impact and mitigation measures.
Thank you, Tremi. So again, these are still preliminary results, but from what I've seen in a similar analysis was that often we could have the mention of a threat or pressure on biodiversity, such as the transport infrastructure, in the context of biodiversity mainstreaming. That is, that the policy document will acknowledge that there's a need to mainstream biodiversity conservation into other sectors. And so the transport sector will be mentioned in the document alongside forestry, agriculture, but that doesn't mean that linear infrastructure as themselves will be discussed more in details afterwards in the document. So there is this gap. First, we acknowledge the need to mainstream, but then concretely, there's a step that needs to be taken to discuss the actual impact and the mitigation, and that's not always what we see in those documents.
Okay, that's interesting. It's a big step, but it's a very important step. If we don't take it, then it's really disregarding such a huge source of impact on wildlife. Thank you for that answer. Ekraj, I'd like to ask you a question now. I think this could be insightful for other countries that are working on their NBSAPs. What are the challenges in effectively executing the NBSAP in Nepal, specifically with regard to the natural resource safeguard targets? And how do you ensure that natural resource safeguards will be implemented effectively?
Thank you so much, Tammy. Yeah, this is a very, very valid question. In fact, you see, in the past, we have experienced that many of the targets could not be implemented in the previous NBSAP. So based on that experiences, we have now the government is adopting more of this adaptive strategy. So based on the learning of the past, they have made more smart target, I would say. And from the very beginning of the preparation process, now they have involved the stakeholders, all the IPLC groups, private sectors, civil society organizations, academia. They all are already on board. We WWF are also in the capacity of technical committee of the government. We are contributing our part on this NBSAP development process. So we hope that during this time, you see, again, the government is adopting whole of society site-based approach to develop and implement this NBSAP. And with the support of UNDP, as I already said, that the government is planning to undertake workshop up to the local level, so that local community will be aware from the very beginning of the preparation process. And WWF is contributing more of science, and the other partners are contributing more of people. So there will be a math, so that we can hope that this will come into implementation effectively based on the learning of the previous NBSAP. So obviously there are many challenges. Again, you see, capacity of the government, you see the priority of the political decision makers. They want to see the results in the infrastructure. So incentivizing them to invest in the biodiversity friendly infrastructure is the big challenges. So moreover, there are financial resources are also challenging. Despite this, there are so many opportunities as well. You see, in the local level, there are, you see, local government, they have own authority to develop the acts and the regulations. And they have, in many of the local governments, they have already institutions, environmental institutions, and they have focal points. So once this get localized at the local level, then we can hope that this will be implemented with the backup of the resource capacity and of course the financial resource. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ekraj. And I see we have a question that I think is also a good one for you to answer. I wonder if you can expand on your reporting on Target 14 on mainstreaming biodiversity safeguards. Did you include a section on infrastructure as a key sector? And if so, did this complement or build on the mention of infrastructure in other targets?
Yeah, this is a good question. What we are thinking is that, you see, we are promoting the government to mainstream the biodiversity, natural resource safeguards into the environmental as well as non-environmental policy and legal frameworks. Towards this, the conservation policies, they have already included the part of this biodiversity safeguards. I'd say most of the policies from the conservation part, they have included already. But now our efforts will be towards mainstreaming, towards the development sector's policy aids and strategies. Moreover, now the 16th development plan of Nepal, it clearly gives avenues for integrating biodiversity into the infrastructure development process. So with this, we can hope that this can be mainstreamed. Our upcoming efforts should be more towards the integrating these safeguards into this non-environmental policy plans and strategies. Regarding to the 14th targets, yes, we are. There are some targets in Nepal already. I could not mention here, but there are targets towards mainstreaming the natural resources into the policy, cross-sectoral policies. So we will strengthen that policy through engaging with the government again.
Thank you for providing that perspective from Nepal. I wonder if Mrs. Tserendorj, if you would like to add to that for your experience in Mongolia, or Neshmiya experience from Pakistan, if you have comments to add to that reflection from Ekraj. Okay. So we have another question here. So this comes about, let's see, this question would be for everyone who is building a new NBSAP that is previously safeguard issues were not addressed and both environmental and social safeguard consideration needs to be done. Is there a particular guide to ensure screening in the first place that the NBSAP will support both environmental and social safeguards? I wonder if you could react to that question, Ekraj.
I think we currently have initial initiatives, but this is very genuine things that we need to do. Maybe we will look it out, and we'll strengthen this part in the coming days. Yeah, we haven't done much on this part.
Okay. Okay, terrific. Thank you for that reflection. And I would like to just pass one more question to Laetitia. We only have 2 more minutes, but perhaps you can kind of close us out with this sort of transcontinental perspective. So looking at your global maps, we see that there seems that Asia was lighting up more than other continents. I noticed the United States did not do a lot of lightening up, but that's, I know we're also, we don't have an NBSAP. But I wonder if you can make the assumption that the issue of transport infrastructure and biodiversity is more prominent in Asia than on other continents.
Thank you. That's a big responsibility to have the last question. First, on the United States, the problem is it's not a party of the CBD actually, so that's why it always pops out in gray in this kind of maps. So it does seem from the global maps that I showed that Asia has more awareness possibly, or makes the issue of linear infrastructure more prominent in the policy documents. However, I would like to highlight that we still have to review some documents in French and Spanish, and this would cover continents that appeared as not considering linear infrastructure. So we still need to add some information in Africa and in South America, for instance. So this is why it might give this impression, and my gut feeling is that it is indeed a bit more considered in the region, but we still need to so stay tuned for future developments once we have reviewed all the documents.
Terrific. We look forward to that publication when you complete it. And of course, we know that Asia has a lot of big cats that we need to take into consideration. So that would, if that were the case, that would be wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for being with us today. We're going to go ahead and just close out the meeting or the webinar today. But once again, we do have another webinar coming up on Monday. It's part of a different series, but it focuses on the development of curricula in engineering and planning schools. This is a part of the Align project that I find to be just mind-bogglingly cool, that that the team is making a difference on that level, at the education level in engineering schools. So I hope you will join us for that webinar on Monday. It starts at 8 a.m. Eastern time. So if you can say what it is for your time zone. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.